been a lot of talk about tariffs in the news lately, and a lot of the things that I've been hearing led me to want to make this video. So, what is a tariff? Simply put, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So, if the United States was going to put a 10% tariff on Japanese vehicles, that means anyone in the United States that wants to purchase the 2025 Toyota Corolla, they're going to pay an additional 10% tax above the tax that they're already paying to the U.S. government for that purchase. So why would the United States do that? Well, there's four main reasons that a government institutes a tariff. The first one would be to protect domestic industry. So in that example with the Japanese vehicle tariff, that tariff would be put in place to protect the U.S. auto manufacturers. By raising the price, the demand for Japanese vehicles should go down, as there are plenty of substitutes here in the good old USA. Although I am a Toyota man through and through, so I might be an exception to that rule. Another reason for a tariff might be to generate additional tax revenue. Now, while this was effective in many countries before the introduction of income tax, it's really hard to justify this as a use case today because the tax revenue that would be generated from that tariff is often dwarfed by the budget itself. So in other words, that 10% tax on the Japanese vehicle, it's not really going to do much to close the $1.8 trillion budget deficit. Now, a tariff might also be imposed to protect national security or public health. And you might not know this, but national security is actually being cited as the main reason for the tariffs that are currently going on between the United States, Canada, Mexico, and China. The reason is to stop the flow of fentanyl and other narcotics into the United States. But some examples where tariffs were used to protect public health include things like China's opium prohibition tariffs in the 1800s or the EU's ban on hormone-treated meat from the United States and Canada. Now, the final reason for establishing a tariff might be to use it as leverage in a trade negotiation or as retaliation for some perceived unfair trade policy. And this is kind of where the current situation in the United States becomes a little confusing, because it's kind of difficult to tell if these tariffs are about trade policy disputes, drug interdiction, or some combination of both. So the question that a lot of people are asking is, do tariffs ever work? Well, actually, yes. Though prevailing sentiment might be extremely negative, there have actually been some cases where tariffs are extremely beneficial, just as there have been situations where they're extremely harmful. So I wanted to take the opportunity today and kind of talk about some examples of each. So good tariffs, right? The Tariff of 1816. Right after the War of 1812, there was a sudden influx of cheap British goods into the United States that threatened a lot of young American industries. I mean, America itself was still a very young nation. So to combat this, Congress enacted the Tariff of 1816, which was also known as the Dallas Tariff, named after the largest proponent of the policy and the Secretary of Treasury at the time, Alexander Dallas. This tariff mostly targeted the textile and iron industries and applied a tax that ranged anywhere from 20 to 25%. And the aim was pretty simple. The government just wanted to give American industry some breathing room to grow and actually be able to compete. The tariff did exactly what it was supposed to do. It helped jumpstart America's industrial revolution, it encouraged investment in manufacturing sectors, and everyone lived happily ever after. All right, bear with me on this next one. Germany's 1834.
Zollverein.
So things in Germany weren't as unified in the 1800s as they are today. It was actually made up of several small states, and each of them kind of had their own trade policies. So in 1834, these states established the
Zollverein,
or German Customs Union, to simplify internal trade by eliminating the tariffs between these member states and creating a common external tariff. This union dramatically reduced the cost and complexity of trading goods in Germany, and it helped a lot of domestic businesses grow stronger and far more competitive. It also played a huge role in economically binding German states together and setting the stage for their eventual political unification, much to our later dismay. So what about bad tariffs? Well, there's an abundance of examples, but I'm going to start off talking about something that economics students or maybe finance students might know something about. It's called the Smoot-Hawley tariff. So in 1930, the United States was slipping deeper and deeper into the Great Depression, and these two
Cool guys.
thought that they could save the day by pushing out an extremely restrictive tariff, later known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The intention was to produce American jobs by raising taxes dramatically on more than 20,000 imported products. But instead of helping, this move actually triggered a massive backlash from America's trading partners and caused them to retaliate with their own tariffs. Because of this trade war that was brewing, international trade plummeted by about 66%, and the global economy sank even deeper into the depression. If you have time to go read about this on your own, I'd highly encourage it, because this is kind of a textbook example of how aggressive tariff policies can backfire pretty brutally. For our last example of a bad tariff, we're going to go to Argentina. From the 1950s to the 1980s, Argentina pursued a policy known as ISI, which stood for Import Substitution Industrialization. So Argentina drastically raised tariffs on imported goods, and they were attempting to encourage domestic production so they could reduce reliance on imports. This one's kind of tricky because Argentina actually initially experienced a burst of growth, but it ended up being unsustainable in the long run for a very predictable reason. A lot of these protected industries, they didn't need to innovate. They didn't need to become more efficient. They didn't face any international competition, so they kind of became complacent. The long-term effect of this was Argentina's economy stagnating, inflation skyrocketing, and Argentina accumulating a massive amount of foreign debt. And by the 1980s, Argentina was facing a severe economic crisis. So this kind of shows the risks associated with prolonged reliance on protective tariffs. So why are we talking about this? What's the point of all this? The main question that I want answered is, when are tariffs good for an economy? When are they bad for an economy? And how does all of that play into what we're seeing today? So when are tariffs good for an economy? Based on our examples, I guess we could broadly say that tariffs can be really beneficial if they're applied carefully, selectively, and temporarily. When an industry is young and struggling against global competition, temporary tariffs can really give it space to breathe without a constant threat. It'll allow them to grow stronger and eventually compete on that stage. I do also think that tariffs can be an effective negotiating tool to combat unfair trade practices or excessively subsidized industries, but it needs to be very carefully done. I do also think that tariffs can protect national security by ensuring that we don't become overly reliant on another country for essential goods or technologies that would make us competitive. But when are tariffs bad for an economy? Well, it's kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. I think tariffs become problematic when they're overly broad or used excessively or too long. Like what we saw in Argentina. If tariffs remain in place for too long, industries become reliant on that protection, and they're not really incentivized to innovate or become more efficient, which over the long term is going to raise their prices. And companies are not charitable. They're not going to just eat that cost difference. They're going to pass the cost on to consumers, you and I, and ultimately that is going to hurt us because it's going to reduce our overall economic well-being. Tariffs are also extremely dangerous when you're talking about retaliatory tariffs. When they provoke retaliatory tariffs and result in a trade war, they kind of contribute overall to global economic instability, which in extreme cases can severely disrupt international trade and cause economic downturns for both countries. So how does this play into what's happening today? Well, I think it's kind of early to tell whether these tariffs are going to be a net positive or a net negative. My one critique with everything that's going on now is it's very dangerous to weaponize tariffs. It seems that tariffs are becoming a significant political tool, especially between the United States and China. And in the long run, I think that this is really only going to hurt the consumer. This is really only going to hurt the average person. And I think the things that we talk about really highlight how easily tariff policies can kind of spiral out of control into broader economic conflict, and really underscores the balance required to use tariffs effectively. So since this is my first video on this channel, I just wanted to be clear that I'm here to provide objective informational content that hopefully you guys find interesting. I'm going to do my best here at least in my current vision, I'm going to do my best here to kind of keep my own opinions and my own ideologies from interfering with the points that we cover. And that said, I'd love for you to do the same. You know, there are so many places on the internet to go kind of voice your political opinion, but my perspective is that in finance and economics, the numbers don't care and the numbers don't lie. And I think that it's our job as economists and financial professionals to navigate those things, right? We're not the ones making the decision, but we need to navigate those events and we need to be able to approach them rationally and objectively. So I highly encourage you to do that here. This can be a great place for that. If you want to leave a comment, critiquing anything that I've said or offering your own opinion, I would love that. But I do ask just that everybody stay respectful and considerate of one another's opinion. If you did like the video, if you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button. Please like the video. As I mentioned, please feel free to comment. I would love to engage with you. Yeah, and until next time, have a good one.